I see, didn't you?
This next piece is called It's Not Going to Be Easy. It explores the way older women participated in and supported active protest of the civil rights movements in St. Augustine and Ocala. Right here.
I got up one morning. I imagine it was after 12 o'clock. I got up to go to the bathroom and I saw a light over there. I walked somewhere, I imagine it was in the foyer, and I went up some stairs and I looked and I saw a state trooper's car parked behind Dr. Haling's office. I came out to the foyer and I looked across the street into the parsonage and I said to May, oh, May was my friend who lived next door. And I said, May, I said to her, I said, May, I saw a cop's car parked in your driveway. And she said, Ladybug. She called me Ladybug. And she said, yeah, that car's been parked there ever since Dr. King left. And I said, why? And she said, well, they've been parking there every morning, the state trooper in your yard. And I said to the state trooper, well, what you been doing there? And he said, well, I've been coming here to see about you. And I said, you've been coming here to see about me? Why? And he said, well, I've been coming here to look for about you and God in your house. And I looked at him and said, why? And he said, because of the movement. And that's when I became afraid. Well, you see, I've been looking at the movement on the television at Selma, all of those other places, and I thought about it, and I said, well, I never thought about that happening here in St. Augustine because we've always been such a close-knit community. And then I saw all the viciousness and the meanness happening, and then all of it coming out. And I thought about it happening for a long time.
I wanted to become, a physical therapist or do something in the medical field. But when I went to Virginia Union College, Frank Pinkston was a senior at Union, and he was also a very good football player. And then he received his bachelor. He enrolled in theological seminary at Union. So, as I said, he was a senior and I was a freshman. He was an outstanding athlete. I would go to the game with my friends and I would see him and, around campus, and I don't know, I guess one thing led to another, and we met and we fell in love and we got married. Instead of a physical therapist, I became Mrs. Frank Pinkston. So then we were married in December of 1958, and of course after that, babies came. Well, 2. I got pregnant, and then I had to stay at home. I got pregnant with our first son, and I went to stay with my parents. That was the end of my protesting, so I was not really on campus when they were having the meetings and so forth. I really don't know about the sit-ins. Even though my father knew and my mother knew, they didn't tell me. Now the sit-ins, what year was that? That was in 1960. I think it was about February 20th. That was when the students first went to Thalheimer's, and they had to sit in. And then 2 days later, after having been told not to come back, they did go back, and that's when they were arrested. 34 students, I think they called them the Richmond 34, were arrested. And at that time, I was in Chase City, Virginia, and that night I was watching television, and I saw on the news, I saw Frank being arrested and placed in a police car. And that's when my father and mother told me that they knew about it, but they had promised Frank that they wouldn't tell me because he didn't want me to be upset because Frank Jr. was born on February 28th. So you can see how close these things were together. But at first when I saw him, I was shocked. I was shocked, but I was not surprised. I felt after the initial shock, I was very proud of him, and I was proud of the other students. I was just sorry that I was not there to join them because I'm sure if I had been in school at that particular time, I would have been in that group. But I had a baby instead.
Back in the day, Mr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to stay with me. And I tell you, he was not the type of person that would come in and demand this or that. Whatever you fixed for him, he liked it. Now, when I would come home from work, I would fix him a steak. Well, I would fix him a T-bone steak. And I would make mashed potatoes, tossed salad, a fresh roll. Now, that was too heavy for me that time of night, but I would make it for Martin Luther King. And so before I would leave for work the next day, I would say, Martin, what you want me to set out for you before I leave for work? And he would say, don't worry about it. Just make me a pitcher of tea. You make the best tea in the world. So, before I left for work, I made him 3 pitchers of ice cold tea, and I put them in the refrigerator. And don't you know, when I came home from work, it was 3 empty pitchers of tea sitting on the table. And so, well, I don't know or remember how many times he stayed with me. Well, I remember 2 times. And one of the times I was sick. But the 3rd time he stayed with me, I remember, yes, sirree, because that was the time I got to see him.
Frank was always a person. He just had this quality about him. When he talked, you could just tell. I just felt he was a person that was destined for something great. He was very optimistic. He had a lot of self-confidence, and he had the ability to just sort of pull people in. That's why I wasn't surprised how big he got when we moved to Ocala. Well, at first, I thought Ocala was small and segregated. And I'll tell you the truth, and I know this will go on record. Marion County ain't the best. It's not the best county in the world to live in, but it became my home. And Frank emerged as the civil rights movement in, I think it was about 1963. The thing about it that was surprising to me was that most of the women were the ones who were really, really outspoken and supported the movement. And the men, for some reason, in my opinion, some of them were a little reluctant to get involved. Maybe it could be because a lot of them had jobs, that the white man, quote unquote, could terminate at will. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of the men were a little reluctant at first. Because, the jobs that they had, and they knew they had families to support. He was really good with young people. Frank organized them, and they wasn't afraid. They was arresting them and putting them in jail, parents going down and getting them out and all that stuff. And then they would start threatening about blowing up church and doing something to our people.
It really was an opportunity for me having met Martin Luther King. Well, because my husband and my son was heavy into the movement. Dr. King looked at me and he told my son, as they went out one night during the demonstrations, he said, Roland, he said, you didn't hit nobody, did you? He said, well, I kind of rubbed up against him a little bit. And he said, well, I forgive you, because that's the viciousness that's in your mama coming out in you.
We would have mass meetings at Covenant Baptist Church. That was his father's church. Those meetings were held sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and the church would be packed inside and people would be standing on the outside. When we had all this meeting thing going on and everything, he was prompt, spoke up, stood up for what was right and righteous. And most people with common sense admired him and worked with him and did a lot of things like that. Frank was very serious about our movement being a non-violent movement. Our meetings were when the community came together and we listened to learn what activities had taken place during that week. We would be given reports about whether or not anyone was arrested or if there were any problems. And then we'd have a sermon from Frank that would tear the roof off of Covenant Missionary Baptist Church. And that wasn't once in a while, that was every week. When we left there just feeling empowered. We were like, we can do this. It's not going to be easy, but we can do this.
King was an amazing person. He really was. He never interviewed anybody. He was always meditating. Before he talked to anyone, he meditated. They would come to that door and they said, Doc, minister, so-and-so is here to see you. He said, okay, and he sat there. And when he heard the person coming, he would come up to that person. He would raise his head and he would sit there and he would walk to the door. He was amazing. And we all used to come out to my house. Yes, everybody would come to my house. And then my house was the headquarters at that time, day and night. You could find him there. He would have everybody come and report to my house, and the reporters would call him on the phone, and they would be talking to him, and he would sit in the kitchen, and you didn't know what he was saying to him because he would talk that soft. He would talk that soft, and you didn't know what he was saying to him, and he would sit on the porch, and we both would sit on the porch, and the Klan would drive by, and we would sit back on the porch, and we would wave to them as they drove by. And we weren't afraid. I was never afraid until he left. And then I was afraid.